All right, good evening, everybody. It is 6 o'clock. I see several of you already on, and several more usually come in the next few minutes while we're taking care of some of our announcements. But glad to have you along. Glad you are here tonight for our Wednesday night Bible study. We'll be beginning a study on Exodus in just a couple of minutes. I do need to take care of just a couple of announcements. First of all, for our Sunday worship, unless we're notified otherwise, we'll be worshiping in person at 9:30, Sunday level, 11 o'clock at Duncan. Our COVID situation still seems to be somewhat improving, getting a little bit of bounce back here and there, but it seems overall to be improving. Case numbers going down, vaccinations hopefully still going up. And if that trend continues, we're trying to unwind some of our safety precautions. When we meet together in person for our worship times, we're trying to unwind some of our precautions. And this past week, we added a limited choir at Duncan, and we eliminated the automatic temperature check and hand sanitizer at the door. Those things are still available at the door. The thermometer is still there. Hand sanitizer is still there and available if you need that. Great, no problem. Go ahead and take advantage of that. But it's just part of the unwinding of some of those precautions that's going to happen over the coming weeks. Next date to look for, if everything continues on the trend that it's on right now, next date to look for is May 30th. On May 30th, Sunday, May 30th, we'll remove the tape and the signs from the pews. Every other pew, we've been seating every other pew for the months that we've been back together. And so on May 30th, if everything continues as is, we will remove the tape and the signs and open up all our pews. Now, chances are most of you are still going to tend to sit in family or close friend groups, much as you have already, but this just opens up and we don't have to skip pews after that. Then, I suppose the big date is July 4th. We are hoping, again, to return to sort of looking and feeling normal there with masks removed. No longer a requirement for masks in the building as of July 4th. So that'll be hopefully kind of our freedom from mask day. So we're looking forward to that. Again, if everything continues on its current trend, that will be the way that it goes. If for some reason we suffer a setback in some way, we'll have to kind of drop back and reevaluate and see what we need to adjust. Because we need to remain flexible. We need to remain responsive to this. Because number one, from day one of pandemic, number one has been to keep all of our people as safe as possible. When anybody is in or around these buildings, we want them to be as safe as possible. And realize that is not, it does not mean a zero risk. Ever since this came onto the scene, we have given up our zero risk, if we ever had a zero risk. But there is some risk in gathering, and so anybody who needs to stay at home, you can do that. We're going to continue to have our online ministry with Facebook Live, and then later to YouTube. And if we have a technology malfunction like we did this past Sunday, we'll get that posted just as soon as we can. Just as soon as we noticed that hadn't posted properly Sunday morning at 11, we went and got that up on the Facebook page, and then we'll get it to the YouTube page. Wednesday night, same thing. So if you need to stay home, that's okay. You can do that. That's why we've invested in this technology, to be able to do that and expand our presence there and our ministry there, so that you can still participate and be part of the congregation as we go forward. If you want to attend in person and you want to keep wearing a mask even after July 4th, no problem. That's totally fine. If you need to sort of isolate, that's okay too. We want to be sensitive to everybody's needs and their ability to reintegrate into something looking normal, but you also need to be very careful in your decisions. Your situation is your situation, and you got to make decisions based on that. We're kind of taking the bigger picture and while trying to stay safe, tending to the bigger picture, but each individual case is different, and we know that. And if you want to continue on masks or distancing or even staying at home, know that we support you, and that's okay. And we'll still, everybody is still trying to include you as much as possible, as much as we possibly can. So that's what all of this is for, is to try to bring everybody together, be able to worship, be able to be together in whatever ways that we can. And still be the body of Christ that we're called to be. So those are kind of the COVID announcements. You'll notice on Tuesdays and Fridays, if you're on the email list, you get an email from me, usually some devotional material on Tuesday, and then Fridays is more announcements and news and kind of what to look forward to for the weekend. You'll find on both of those a prayer list. So pay attention to that. Pay attention to the folks that need prayer in particular ways when you get that. And if you're not on the list, let me know and I'll be sure to get you on the email list. It's a great way to stay in touch and a great way to stay up to date on whatever announcements and whatever business we've got going on. You can get those as they come out. And then any prayer requests that are needed in between those 2 points, we send out an individual email based on those, or if there's any important news that needs to go out right now, as opposed to a regularly scheduled Tuesday or Friday, we get it out in between. But you're not going to get slammed with 1,000 emails a week or anything. It's just to keep you in the loop and help keep you up to date with what's going on. So that's our announcements. Let's have a word of prayer, and then we'll get to our study for the evening. Gracious God, as we pause in our week, we pause to hear you. We pause to listen, to invite your Spirit to be with us and to be among us, even from all our remote locations. Your Spirit is with us because we are gathered. Maybe not in the same room, but we are gathered nonetheless as your people, and we ask for your help and your guidance as we do this. We ask for your help in particular for those that we have listed on our prayer list, for those that we may be aware of that may not be written down on that list, but we still have them on our heart, and we still reach out to them and look out for them and care about them. And God, we ask for healing and help, for strength, for resilience to be able to do what they need to do. We ask for help for their caregivers, people who help them, that you would give them strength and endurance to be able to be the helpers that you call them to be. And help us to all reach out in your name wherever we can. And again, on our study tonight, guide our thoughts, guide our direction, so that we may take something from what we study tonight into the world tomorrow. In Christ's name, amen. Okay, so tonight we start a new study. We've just completed a several-week study on spiritual disciplines. Tonight, we're going to get into the book of Exodus. It's going to be a little bit different than our kind of theme-driven things. We had some Advent stuff. We had some Lent stuff that were kind of adjusted to the season more than to one particular book. We skipped around in Scripture looking for the ways those apply to different situations in those seasonal studies. But tonight we get back to a book study, book of Exodus. And just as a little bit of background, what we had done pre-COVID, we had been studying through the book of Genesis, and we had just ended that, I believe. If memory serves, we had just completed Genesis, and we were looking to move on to another book, move on to another subject, and the group that was there when we were doing the in-person Wednesday, everybody was kind of in agreement. Hey, we just finished Genesis, why not move on to Exodus? It's next, right? So we decided we'll just go on and continue the story. So that's where we're kind of returning tonight, is just to go back and pick up Exodus, and hopefully depending on where we are in the book, I've just been kind of trying to wrap my brain around this and sort of map out things for the weeks to come. And depending on where we are in the book and how much is going on at any particular time in the book, we may cover a chapter. We may get a couple of chapters. There are times when we may get more than that. But we're just going to kind of take it at the pace that we need to. Not going to get in a rush. Not going to hopefully not get bogged down anywhere, but not get in a rush about it. Just kind of take the pace that we need to take to cover what's there. So tonight, I'm hoping maybe in our 30 or so minutes that we have for the lesson tonight, I'm hoping maybe to get through chapter 2. Maybe that's optimistic, but I'm hoping to get through chapter 2. But we're going to be reading some sections or parts of sections and then talking about those a little bit, and just sort of a commentary plus ideas associated with what's going on in Genesis. Now, the big picture of Exodus, I think I just said Genesis, but Exodus, big story of Exodus is this is the story that continues, literally. I mean, there's a time gap, but the story continues from Genesis into Exodus. And it's a story of God's people and God's faithfulness, leading them, picking them up, carrying them, building up confidence in them, building up faith, and then, well, it's sort of this off and on thing as to how they respond. It's been 400 years, roughly, between the end of Genesis and the beginning of Exodus. And in that 400 years, we'll see that God has not forgotten that his people are in Egypt and that their situation has changed. God saw their misery. We're going to see that when we get over to chapter 3. But God has seen what was a good situation in Genesis is now turned into a bad one at the beginning of Exodus. And God has heard their suffering and promised to deliver them from oppression. And this is a core story in the Jewish people. This is a foundational story. I would argue one of two most important stories in Jewish tradition. This is one of them, and then the return, or the exile, and then the return from exile later on is the other. But those are kind of the two stories that really have formed the Jewish people and given them as a people sort of the glue that's held them together for thousands of years. This common story and this common journey and purpose that's gained in Exodus and then again in the exile that comes later in the scriptures. But God has promised to deliver them from slavery into the promised land. Lots of drama we're going to see coming up in early Exodus that you're familiar with a lot of it, especially in the broad strokes, but maybe some details that we'll read and talk about in the coming weeks that you'll go, oh, I forgot about that part or whatever. And so there's a lot of drama that goes on. The first obstacle is, of course, the Red Sea, and that's taken care of. They walk across the Red Sea on dry land, and you'd think, the faith has been built, and yet after they've done that, just a matter of days, they don't have any water, they're thirsty, and they panic again, and they grumble about it, and they pray, and Moses prays, and they God gives them water. So they got another miracle under their belt in just a few days. And you think they would be built up with confidence, ready to go, full of faith. About a month and a half later, they're grumbling again because they didn't have enough food. Oh, we had great food in Egypt. We don't have much food here. So it kind of sets up that pattern that we're going to see that's very familiar. It goes on through Exodus. Some of it even continues into the books after Exodus, of this up and down of God proving to be faithful, and then the people celebrating that, and then very shortly the people falling off from that and going, where is God? What has God ever done for us? What have you done for me lately, to paraphrase Janet Jackson? But I mean, they fall into this sort of it's almost like a short-term memory loss or something. A few days before there's a miracle, and then suddenly they forgot and think that they're going to die. But in that journey, something that has helped the Jewish people for thousands of years, and in turn has helped Christian people as we have come after Jewish people in a lot of these stories and being connected to them. The thing about this journey is going to be that hopefully we see ourselves in this. In the idea of there's a miracle, celebration, faith, and then we trickle away and forget. Right? Hopefully, in that, we won't just read the story and go, "Oh, those silly people. They should remember what happened last week." That's just silly that they don't. Well, instead of us having that sort of response, hopefully, as we read through Exodus, we'll have more of a response of, wow, that sounds like me. Because God does something for me on Tuesday, and then by Friday, I'm complaining, wondering, where is God? It can be very much like us. And so we can see a reflection of ourselves in this journey that we're going to take. Paul even says in 1 Corinthians, that he talks about how we can learn lessons. There's something to learn from this in the example of the Israelites. And the time that they went through the wilderness and what they did and how they react, we can learn from that. Paul says that's a good, fertile learning ground for us. And one of the first things I think we can learn is that, the life is full of things that can be a trial for us, that can be tests for us, and going through those things in turn will test our faith. And how does our faith comfort us? How does it guide us? How does it help us? How does it strengthen us? So all those questions can come into play just by saying, okay, we're living, going about our business, this calamity happens. How does my faith inform that? And so this is a big, fertile ground for us to learn from. Because at the end of all this, and buried throughout this, is the idea of a God who cares, a God who hears and responds and helps and cares the whole way. And that's sort of the big thing. Now, and we also, as we start into this book, we get a lot of drama. We get a really dramatic story. Big things happen, really dramatic things happen, and we get invited into that story. And as we read the story, I would invite you as well as myself to as we read, to try to picture this, try to get vivid pictures of what's going on. If you're reading through it, just occasionally close your eyes and just think about what you just read and see if you can see the sights, smell the smells. Put yourself in the story, because inserting ourselves into a story like this can help, I think, bring up some of those emotions and some of those connections that we can make with it, and help put us in the story. It's a story of deliverance. You got to have a deliverer to be delivered. So that's God, first of all, but then God's got a helper / servant / leader for the people. He chooses Moses, right? Now, the book of Exodus is called the book of names by the rabbis, because it starts out, the beginning of the book, starts out talking about the people who came to Egypt. Of course, a little bit of a rewind. They came to Egypt to escape the famine that was going on in Canaan back in the latter parts of the book of Genesis. And because of what Joseph had done, they had provision there. They were okay. Getting to Egypt, Jacob and his family get all his herds and daughters and sons and grandkids and all the people down to Egypt, where Joseph has had the wisdom and the forethought and the wherewithal to store up food for the bad years. They're okay. And Joseph and his family, very respected at first. But then at the beginning of Exodus, we start to get this replay of how that respect sort of trickled away. While the Israelite people are multiplying, the memory of what Joseph did to help everybody, Egyptian, Israelite alike, the memory of that starts to fade, and the respect starts to fade, and they start being viewed as just those people who came here and started having babies and multiplying, right? It's those people who breached our border and came here, and now they're here just multiplying, and they're a nuisance, right? So that's sort of the feel that we start getting at the beginning of Exodus. There are estimates that say, starting from Jacob's family there at the end of Exodus, and who's named, and what the numbers they talk about. If you multiply that out over generations, there are people that say there could be as many as 2 million of the Israelites by the time of Moses, by the time of this beginning of Exodus. But that's a lot. It is 2 million people. You've got quite a population spread there in your country of people who came here from somewhere else. But Pharaoh is not happy about that, and Pharaoh responds in some ways. Starting in verse 8, I'm going to read just a few verses here. In chapter 1 of Exodus, starting in verse 8, says, "Then a new king, to whom Joseph meant nothing," that trickling away sort of respect and memory of what Joseph did. "New king to whom Joseph meant nothing came to power in Egypt. Look," he said to his people, "these Israelites have become far too numerous for us. Come, we must deal shrewdly with them, or they will become even more numerous. And if war breaks out, we'll join our enemies, fight against us, and leave the country." So they put slave masters over them to oppress them with forced labor, and they built Pithom and Ramses as store cities for Pharaoh. But the more they were oppressed, the more they multiplied and spread. So the Egyptians came to dread the Israelites and worked them ruthlessly. They made their lives bitter with harsh labor, brick and mortar, with all kinds of work in the fields, and in all their harsh labor, the Egyptians worked them ruthlessly. All right, so during the centuries the Jews had been in Egypt, they had seen a lot of different dynasties. A lot of different rulers had come along, I'm sure, in 400 years. So they'd seen all these, but then this diminishing memory of Joseph, lo those many years ago, and what he did, and the diminishing respect, combined with the multiplication, suddenly there's, or maybe not so suddenly, there's a Pharaoh that comes along that decides to do something about this. And they make life miserable for these Israelites. They'd been a source of blessing, but now they're considered outsiders and nuisance, and so Pharaoh decides, wow, if somebody comes in to try to invade us, well, they're going to take their side. I don't know why he assumed that, but he says, they're going to take the enemy side, and they're going to take over us, and they're going to leave, and everything's going to be horrible. And so he institutes this first layer of suffering for the Jewish people, and that's going to be something that the Jewish people, we know this, the Jewish people have suffered at various points in history terribly through this, through a couple of exiles in the Old Testament, through Greek and Roman occupation, on into the Middle Ages and blood libels, and then into Europe almost to the modern day, and then definitely in modern day Germany during around World War II. Horrible suffering. Horrible suffering, and it just comes over and over and over. And this is sort of a beginning of all that. This is the first one. The Egyptian taskmasters, it says, work them ruthlessly. It says it several times in there. Yet they continued to multiply. So here's the next step. Pharaoh decides to step it up. Verse 15. King of Egypt said to Hebrew midwives, who were named Shiphrah and Puah, "When you are helping the Hebrew women during childbirth on the delivery stool, if you see that a baby boy is born, kill him. But if it's a girl, let her live." The midwives, however, feared God and did not do what the king of Egypt told them to do. They let the boys live. Then the king of Egypt summoned the midwives and asked them, "Why have you done this? Why have you let the boys live?" The midwives answered Pharaoh, Hebrew women are not like Egyptian women. They are vigorous and give birth before the midwives arrive. So God was kind to the midwives. People increased and became even more numerous. And because the midwives feared God, he gave them families of their own. So that's the next step, trying to kill the boys. And if they had succeeded, you got to think about this. If they had succeeded, then the future generation is kind of cut off. The future generation of Israelites, they saved the girls, and then eventually, with no boys in the Israelite nation, well, the girls would be married off to Egyptians. They become melded with the Egyptians, and Israelites would just kind of disappear over time. So that would have been the end result had they succeeded. These midwives, they're kind of they're kind of shrewd, and I got to think these two were named, but there's probably more. I mean, if you're talking 2 million people, there's a lot of births going on, so there's probably more than two of them. But these two are mentioned here, and maybe they were part of the team, and this is what they decided, to do, and this is how we're going to be in civil disobedience, which is kind of cool. It's one of like the first examples, especially in Scripture, to say, yeah, we're gonna be civilly disobedient. We're not really lashing out at you or anything. We're not doing anything bad. We're just kind of slow walking this one. We're going to drag our feet a little bit, dragging their feet long enough that they say that the children are already born, and the Israelite women are just really hardy, and the boys have already been born, and that was before we could get there and do anything about it. Can't do anything about it. Oops, sorry. Right? So they kind of slow walked their way into some civil disobedience, it's sort of a reminder, I think, for us to say, okay, we're told in a lot of places, including in Romans and First Peter and some other places, to be respectful of and to be compliant with our leadership. We're supposed to do that. It's sort of Christian duty, to go about our business, live in the way of Christ, and be respectful of those in authority. That's what we're supposed to do. At the same time, there are situations when civil disobedience might just be in order, and these two women who are called out here give us an example of that. The idea of, like I said, they weren't throwing bombs or anything. They just slow walked it enough, arranged the situation in such a way as to not quite carry out a directive that they knew was wrong, morally wrong. It was across to what they knew in their hearts was right. Similar things that we experienced in recent memory, in the civil rights era of the 1950s and 60s. African Americans sitting on the front of the bus when they're not supposed to. They're not hurting anybody, not doing anything, just sitting on the bus, just saying, hey, I deserve to sit here too. Same thing in lunch counters, or not riding the bus, boycotting the bus. Hey, we're just not riding the buses, right? We'll try that. See if it gets your attention. It's a way of speaking out in a spiritual way to say this crosses the line for us morally and spiritually. Now, when you kept a people down, as in the case of civil rights movement, when you kept the people down and abused a people, this is a means that we have to try to peacefully get your attention. Same thing has gone on here with these two women slow walking things for Pharaoh at the beginning of Exodus. Verse 22 says the next step, that Pharaoh gave the order to all his people, every Hebrew boy that is born you must throw into the Nile, but let every girl live. So now he stepped it up even more. If they're born and you didn't catch them when they were born, okay, well now you got to take them and throw them in the river. So he just keeps escalating this thing to try to deal with this multiplication problem that he believes he has. Pharaoh's police or his enforcer guards or whatever, they can't check up on every midwife, obviously. They can't keep their eye on everybody who might be giving birth in a population that big. But they could kind of get word back eventually that one had been born, and then, well, you're supposed to throw them in the Nile. But one, as we know, one would survive. There may have been others who did indeed die. I'm sure there were, but at least one there is that Pharaoh could not kill. So let's get into chapter 2. I don't think we're going to be able to finish chapter 2 tonight, but let's get into chapter 2. Starting in verse 1. Now a man of the tribe Levi married a Levite woman, and she became pregnant and gave birth to a son. When she saw that he was a fine child, she hid him for 3 months. But when she could hide him no longer, she got a papyrus basket for him and coated it with tar and pitch. Then she placed the child in it and put it in the reeds along the bank of the Nile. His sister stood at a distance to see what would happen to him. Then Pharaoh's daughter went down to the Nile to bathe, and her attendants were walking along the riverbank. She saw the basket among the reeds and sent her female slave to get it. She opened it, saw the baby. He was crying, and she felt sorry for him. This is one of those Hebrew babies, she said. Then his sister asked Pharaoh's daughter, "Shall I go and get one of the Hebrew women to nurse the baby for you?" "Yes, go," she answered. So the girl went and got the baby's mother. Pharaoh's daughter said to her, "Take this baby and nurse him for me, and I will pay you." So the woman took the baby and nursed him. When the child grew older, she took him to Pharaoh's daughter, and he became her son. She named him Moses, saying, "I drew him out of the water." So the text here emphasizes faith of Moses' mother. Hebrews, when you read over there, it mentions mother and father, trusting God. So faithful household there. They're trying, just like the midwives did, to try to find some way around this directive that Pharaoh has given, and they hide this baby and then come up with this way to put him in the water and have him found. They defied this edict from Pharaoh in the only way that they could. And it wasn't easy to do. Like I said, Pharaoh probably had people around checking, informers telling, so it wouldn't be easy to do. And she put the baby in the Nile. She's trusting in God to take care of that baby, and that must have been really hard to do. But she's trusting in God that God wouldn't fail her. And when the princess comes to the Nile, sees the basket, hear him cry, you notice that moment made her sad. She actually came face to face with this baby, and it affected her very deeply. I mean, her instincts told her, you got to rescue. There's a baby. You got to rescue the baby, right? So she takes him in, has him cared for, and as things would work out, Sister Miriam works it out so that Mom actually gets to come and help raise Moses, at least when he's young there. So the princess adopts him as her own son. That means that Moses has come into a really good position, a position of power that others in his world do not have. He's been welcomed into the palace and will be raised as the son of this Egyptian princess. He's going to get good education. He's going to learn Egyptian language. He's going to learn Egyptian customs. He's going to be inside the power structure, right? And this is one, and I think we'll wrap up here in just a couple minutes. And sorry we didn't finish chapter 2 tonight, but anyway, this is one other point I wanted to touch on before we go. The idea that he is in the power structure, and he has access that his people do not have. It reminds me of the sorts of situations that can play out these days. I've mentioned this kind of thing before, last time, Sunday mornings, Wednesday night, whatever, of if you are in a position to be able to stick up for somebody, use that position you have to do that, right? Being having the privilege of being in a place where you have access to something that another does not gives you a unique position to be able to stick up for other people, to use your voice for other people. If you see somebody being abused, I mean, especially in some of the terrible things that we've seen of people of color suffering abuse in some way, there have been cases where others around, especially white people, have been able to use their position of influence, their position of whatever power they have in society, to be able to say, hey, stop that. Hey, don't do that. This is wrong, right? And be able to affect it. And unfortunately, it doesn't happen enough. But there have been positions or times when that can happen. And so I think this can remind us, of one person getting into an area where they can influence things. And I think this will play into later parts of the story when Moses comes back and talks to Pharaoh. This is not going to spoil anything because we all know the basic parts of the story, so I'm not spoiling anything for Exodus. But when Moses comes back later and he's able to talk to them, part of that is because he learned the language very well when he was growing up. Part of that is because he knew how things worked around the palace, how to behave, how to address Pharaoh. Even the idea of being known, being a known person from having been there before, probably served at least to a degree to help him get into that conversation. Whereas if just the guy working on some building out there that was an Israelite guy wanted to show up and talk to Pharaoh, it might not have even gotten in the door, probably wouldn't, right? But this helped Moses not just as he's growing up, but later on to be able to give Pharaoh a push and to be able to affect things because he had a position of privilege in that system, in that power structure. He was able to exercise some of that. And so I think that gives us an opportunity to say, I need to be mindful of that. If I'm in a position where I am considered somehow privileged in some way or influential or powerful in some way, and we all have places where we can carry out power of some sort, whether it's authority or expertise or knowledge or just knowing somebody enough to be able to address them in a way that somebody else couldn't. We all have ways that we could be mindful to step up and kind of put ourselves in between trouble and somebody else who doesn't have the sort of power or influence that we might have in a given situation. So I think that's where we're going to pause this week. We're just into chapter 2, so we'll take up around about verse 11 next week in chapter 2 of Exodus. If you want to read ahead, that's great. Read ahead. I'm still going to read most of the passages before we talk about them, but if you want to read ahead, that's great, and it helps kind of everybody familiarize and get on the same page, literally, when we meet back together. But we'll do that again next Wednesday night. Hope you found something tonight you can take with you, and we'll continue on into the story next Wednesday night, taking up around chapter 2, verse 11. All right, so I hope to see you Sunday morning, either 9:30 at Sunny Level or 11 o'clock at Duncan, or online at 11 o'clock. Hope to see you then. In the meantime, have a wonderful, blessed evening and a blessed rest of the week. So, good night.